There's only one boss and one boss only. You never follow anyone if you're superior to all.
In smoky rooms where deals are made, loyalty the ace he's played. A friend of ours, he'll stand up tall. Through gunfire smoke, he'll never fall. With heart of gold and steel resolve, a mystery we'll never solve.
Brothers and sisters, welcome back. Welcome back to the Friend of Ours podcast. This is a limited edition show hosted by your main man, Duke Loves Rasslin, and of course, the Don of Wrestling himself, legitimately one of the most well-respected, one of the most appreciated, and dare I say, one of the most feared men to ever lace up the boots, brother Big Vito LoGrasso. How's it going there, Vito?
I'm doing good. I hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody's doing great in this new year. Um, Duke, it's a pleasure to be here. I know we just had a conversation about life and how things are done, especially talking about family business, because that's what we're in the business of, the family. So, Duke, before we start off, how was your New Year's? I mean, tell the people what you did on New Year's.
But my New Year's was so exciting and crazy. You know, we painted the town red, white, and blue in the whole 9 yards. Please, I had what did I eat? I made some coconut shrimp. We had wings. We had other little, meats and cheeses and the different fancy. I love the entertainment crackers, so all the different types of crackers. I made frozen mango cocktails, and my lady and I we watched Yellowstone and just relaxed, man, and had a good time. That was my New Year's, at least at night. I made sure that once I got home, I locked the door, set the alarm, and didn't go out again. So it was a good time on my part there. How about yourself, there, Vito?
We we had a great night because I worked and then I got off early, spent time with my lady, and for a change, we got to enjoy the holidays this year because everybody knows she hasn't been health wise, she hasn't been good for the past 2 years, but we got a chance to celebrate the holidays. And it was really, really good to be able to feel normal with no pressure, no no worries about hospitals or doctors or anything. And it gave me some peace of mind, gave me a great outlook for the new year, and I'm just happy that my wife feels a lot better.
What is it about family that is so important? So it's the thing that's constantly preached about. It's the thing that you're measured by, especially when within the Italian culture. What is it about family that is such a big deal that you and other folks within the culture, you make this legitimately part of your identity?
Well, I mean, it's the way you're brought up. I mean, I know everybody's brought up a little different, and everybody has a different culture, a different religion, a different way of life. And when you are family oriented when you're a kid, those are the days you go back to and you say, "Yeah, man, I remember when I had my cousins and we celebrated every birthday, every holiday, um, any kind of block party, any kind of feast, any kind of things that were like that were the norm." But then when you look back, those were special times, and that like being the norm. Like I'm sure Duke and everybody out there who's listening, and we have a great following, and thank you to everybody for listening. Um, I'm sure everybody out there, if they take a moment and close their eyes for a second and just remember your childhood, and now think about when you used to go to birthday parties and you used to have your friends over and you used to have Christmases, and who was there with you? Your family. So these are things that you grow up with, and these are things that are, embedded in you. And it's just a shame that we lose focus of our family heritage, not just Italian. I'm talking Italian, Jewish, Puerto Rican, Vietnamese, Chinese, German, African American. I'm talking about every different kind of culture out there. And when you think about it, we are all brought up the same way, and we are all sharing the same kind of sentiment and thoughts because as you move on in life and you go live other places, what's the one thing you think about when you look at things? You think about, yeah, man, those are the good times of my life when, I was a kid and I had summer vacation in Long Island, or I went to Cape May, or I went to the Jersey Shore, and you enjoyed your life with your family. And that's how most people are brought up. Now, Duke, I know that you have a strong family background, and I know you share the same sentiments as I do.
100%. 100%. I make it a point to check in on my family daily. At least once a week, I visit my mom and my sister, and take mom to do errands and things like that. Like it's a thing. It's a very important thing. I made a song for my aunt for Christmas. Literally made it like we have our theme song that I put together. I put one together for my aunt. She wasn't feeling too well, and she really enjoyed that. Yes, the whole concept of family, same way with my culture there. But it's interesting because even in Italian culture, you often find that generations of families will live if it's in the same building or the same neighborhood or not far from each other. But legitimately, I know so many Italian people who they live very close to other family members, and that's like a thing. It's the way it is. Generations and generations, they're literally 10 minutes away or less, and what have you. Why? Why again? Why is that such an important thing?
Duke, I just think it's because of the way your mother and father raised you. And people out there who are listening, and we have like I said, we have a very lucrative and grand audience, and this spreads worldwide for people listening. And I know we hit a lot of different cultures, and I know we hit a lot of different fans, and a lot of people who listen because they like the content that we have. But family of any culture, of any kind of credence, you go back to when you were a kid, and if you just sit there and you dream and you look and you close your eyes and you see the happiness, I just think that's just the basis of how people are brought into the world. Now, back a couple of generations ago, it was heavier than what it is today because as you move on to different parts of the world, like I've lived around the world, and like, okay, my New York upbringing is not the same as my Florida lifestyle. It is very different. And they don't do holidays and they don't do barbecues and they don't do anything like they do in New York. Now, Duke, I know you've been in basically the same area for a good portion of your life. So, you living outside the box, I don't think you've experienced that kind of difference yet. Am I right or wrong on that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've done a lot of traveling. I pretty much have been to every state in the United States outside of Alaska and Hawaii. So I've done a lot of traveling, but as far as living, as far as my residence, I've never left Massachusetts, and I've always been very close, within a 20-minute drive, let's say, of Boston.
Right. So, you haven't had the experience or the privilege to live outside of your means to see how life is outside the outside the comfort. I know this is very, very specific, guys, because I'm trying to use the words that everybody understands. And being outside your comfort zone can make life easy or it can make it hard. When I say easy, if you have a difficult time in where you're living and you move outside that comfort and you go someplace else and you leave all your problems behind, you have found a stress free life and you're willing to take on new challenges. But when you live in one place with your family, you deal with the same concept of life and the redundance of problems that go along inside your family. Duke, I know you can attest to this because you have many friends, um, high and low, who have moved on, moved around, and actually live in the same place, the same as I do. But being that you are very articulate in how you present yourself, especially on the podcast, you can understand what we're talking about and what I'm presenting to not only you, but our great fans out there who are listening. And maybe you can give them a little bit of your insight on this.
Well, I just think that, like you said, it's all about how you're raised. I grew up at a very young age and was able to witness on my mother's side. My grandmother had a stroke, and I got to witness all of, not just my mom but her siblings who were here. They all took turns taking care of grandma. At times, grandma lived with each of the siblings. Everyone took turns
Right.
taking grandma to her hospital visits and things like that, and helping her get over the original massive stroke and getting back out there and things like that. So you're watching children, they're adults to me, but you're watching children take care of their parent who's in need. And as I grew older and became an adult and was able to drive and do things like that, suddenly I was also participating in helping grandma get from point A to point B, going to doctor's appointments and stuff like that. This was all normalized. So when
Right.
we fast forward to modern times, grandma has passed away and all that stuff. Now my mom is retired. Um, it's normal for me, and it makes sense. Okay, mom has a doctor's appointment. You got to take her there. Mom has to go, to this place or that place. She doesn't want to drive at night, or she'd rather me just do the driving or whatever. Like there are things that were instilled in me at such a young age that it's second nature because that's all I know. You know what I mean? So even the whole concept of moving away, I'm not going to move so far away that I can't get to my mother if she's in a time of need. Can't do it. It's not in my nature. I was brought up a certain way that you got to be there for your parent. There's only two of us. I'm the oldest, so it's my responsibility for the rest of her life to make sure that I'm available enough that if she needs me, I can get on it. So that's part of the you give me life, you took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself, and now the roles start to slowly reverse. There it is.
Okay. Now, Duke, I know we have some other business to take care of today, and I know you have a great, great project that we're going to elaborate on for all of our listeners about the family, about this thing of ours. So, Duke, why don't you go into what we're going to talk about today?
Well, we had such a tremendous response, and we always do. Anytime Vito starts talking about his personal connection and his family's connection to the lifestyle, and, for lack of a better term, the bloodline, and how it all fits into what we know about, La Cosa Nostra and all that good stuff there. And there's one figure in particular that legitimately is one of the most well known and really one of the more important figures in the history of the American mob by the name of Lucky Luciano. And Vito is directly related to Lucky. So we've been teasing this thing, and we started off a little bit last episode, and here we are picking up and going full steam ahead. I'm gonna use Boardwalk Empire, and I'm gonna use a specific episode, season 5, episode 1, to illustrate Lucky Luciano, who he was, and different things that he did in order to get to the point where he's legitimately an icon. He's somebody that's a name that everybody knows. All the rappers, all the actors, everybody, they still to this day reference Lucky Luciano because of the way that he did business and because he was a guy that didn't play any games, so to speak. But it's one thing to talk about stories and semi-fictional portrayals of somebody. It's another thing when you have a guy like Vito, who this is his ancestor, reacting to some of this stuff. So Vito, I challenged you to go back and watch episode 5, season 5, episode 1 of Boardwalk Empire, and specifically Lucky Luciano being responsible for the hit on Joe the Boss Mazzaria. So, did you have a chance to go back and take a look at that episode there, Beto?
I actually do watch this great show, and when you're talking about Mr. Masseria, and you talk about who he was in the show, he was the boss of bosses. There was nobody better than him. He didn't work for nobody. He was the boss. He was a very good boss, I thought. He was somebody who, um, portrayed what the mafia was, and you had to have that arrogance. You had to have um, that extra oomph and toughness and smugness because nobody could beat you at your game. And to get to that spot, Mr. Masseria had to do some things coming up on the street to put himself in the number one spot. Now, when you're talking about Boardwalk Empire and you look at that series and you see Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, Mr. Masseria, Nucky Thompson, it is a great mix of characters, especially Atlantic City and how things were done, especially in, the import export of liquor, heroin, um, ladies of the evening, and the lifestyle that was back then and how you come up. Now, everybody knows in Chicago, Al Capone was one crazy son of a bitch. Lucky Luciano, when you look at him and you analyze what he was a young entrepreneur at 22 years old. And he was somebody who had that 150 horsepower that'll fly off the handle. And, people, and this is something that's real, guys. When I watch him and know what he's capable of and know how his characteristics are, and I compare him to myself, being that it's blood related, it's scary because I look at myself and say, yep, that's exactly what I did. Yes, that's exactly how I would get up. Yes, Howard, that's exactly how I would fly off the handle. And I didn't give a shit who was around, who the boss was. You got up and you defended your turf. And because you're young and explosive, that is something that can be a tremendous asset to you or a tremendous downfall to you. Duke, am I on point with what you're watching on TV?
You're completely on point, and knowing you, I feel the same exact way. Watching the entire Boardwalk Empire series, I always felt, wow, this guy's familiar. Yeah, he reminds me of Vito. And then, oh yeah, that's right, Vito's related to Lucky, so it makes sense. But one of the things that it's not just the temper, it's not just the willingness, to drop everything and throw down when somebody disrespects you, or somebody's going the wrong way, they dishonor an agreement or something like that. It's also the fact that Lucky Luciano, just like you, is somebody who was able to still do business and to make deals and to find a way. It wasn't just, I got to fight everybody. Fighting was
Right.
always like a last resort or a have to. But for the most part, this guy was always looking for ways to improve upon his personal conditions, improve upon what's happening for the people around him. Let's make some more money. Let's establish ourselves. And if we got to find ways to and find common ground with people who maybe we didn't even like yesterday and maybe we won't like tomorrow, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to politically find ways to move forward one way or another. There's something about that quality that I feel like embodies you more than anything else. I mean, so I throw it back to you. Does that make sense to you?
No, it does. It really does. I mean, and in this world, especially when you live in this lifestyle, especially when you're on the street, it's not only about fighting and protecting who you are and what in your territory or your turf. You have to have the gumption of doing business. And if you can't do business, you're not making any headway and you're not getting nowhere. And you can't kill everybody because that'll only get you so far. But being a businessman on the street and being able to do business, that is the secret to being the top guy. And that is the secret to being respected and feared at the same time.
Deep, super deep. I wanted to ask you about this specifically as it relates to that episode of Boardwalk Empire and Lucky, because this is a major turning point historically. The setup of Joe the Boss Mazzaria, right? This clears the way for the commission to be formed. And that's the turning
Right.
point. That now the American mafia is, full scale. It's a real organized business where there's a hierarchy and people understand their roles, and it's more organized than ever. You have the different what evolves into the five families and things like that, especially in the New York area. All of that happens because of this one hit. My question to you is, how does a guy get to a point where he pulls something like this off, taking out a boss? And what happens if it didn't work? What happens if the hit was botched or what have you? When the boss was at that meeting to meet with this one person, you try to take that person out, it didn't happen. Now what? What are you stuck with? I'm not asking you from personal experience because I don't think you have personal experience with that, but from what you've heard and seen and what you understand in general, talk to me about the whole notion of a young guy stepping up to take out a boss and then having to deal with the aftermath of that. Any thoughts on that whole concept?
When you are working for somebody and there is a hold on how far you can go, you can't go no further, or you have to answer for everything, or you can't make any decisions. You always have to, be somebody's underboss. And when it comes to a point where the boss is squeezing the quarter so tight that nobody can make money and nobody can make a move, that's when a commission is formed, or that's when the underbosses start to talk of a takeover. Now, who's going to do the takeover? Has to be somebody who's willing to take the risk because if it is a botched hit, they always find out who does it. So then you have to be ready for the retaliation because your life is never going to be the same no matter where you go. You always have to look over your shoulder. With this particular scene where Lucky Luciano went from Nucky Thompson and Rothstein to Masseria, he went through a chain where he got a little taste of everybody. And then he said, okay, I had enough of this. And as you can see, it's a resemblance of the Mafia hit where Michael Corleone took out the man who wanted to kill his father. Do you recall that scene in The Godfather, Duke?
Absolutely. I'll never forget it. The restaurant scene.
Right. So now, when you excuse yourself to go to the bathroom, which is a very prominent scene in this particular film, because when you look at how Michael Corleone took out the gentleman who tried to kill his father, he excused himself to go to the bathroom, and then he came out and he whacked the gentleman and a police captain. In this scene, Lucky Luciano just says, "Hey, I have to go to the head." Goes to the bathroom as two hitmen walk in, a resemblance of the Castellano hit at the steakhouse where a couple of underbosses went in. Castellano arrives. The hit is done. The two people the two capos on the inside, the two underbosses on the inside. Okay, once the hit is done, they both leave. Said it's time to go, and they both walk off. They know what happened, and nobody says anything because nobody knows nothing. So if you see the cycle that it goes in, it all goes in a certain cycle and a certain way of doing things. It just so happens that this particular killing is a resemblance of the Corleone killing. And remember, you're talking about the 20s, 30s, 40s, and I believe the Corleone killing was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I think the 60s. I'll say it that way, this way, because we'll give it a look. So it's in the same era, the same decade or a decade later, how they hit each other and how they took out each other. Duke, can you elaborate on that for me and the people?
Similar, yeah, because remember, The Godfather, although it's fictional, they're taking things that really happened in real life, which would have been the 20s, the 30s, the 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s. You're absolutely right. Right around that time period is what The Godfather is shining a light on in the beginning.
Right.
Lucky
Exactly.
Luciano, you're talking the late 1800s, the going through the 30s and 40s and what have you. Absolutely.
So now, when you talk about those kind of hits, now you move into the era of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and you talk about the same kind of concept of hits. And I think it's just something that carries over and something that you actually grow up and you say, hey, this is what's going down. This is what's happening. A group of people might have a meeting or a sit down and say, I don't like the way things are going. Well, we need to have this sanctioned. We need to have an okay from all the other bosses. And if you get the okay, who's the one who's going to step up and do it? The guy who steps up and does it is the guy who's going to be rewarded and be the top guy. So when Luciano, being a gung ho entrepreneur, wise guy, businessman, who, if you watch Empire, watch the TV series when he had the heroin hit. Now, remember the heroin when he did the heroin job
Yep.
and Masseria caught him?
Yep.
and he was ready to throw down and go, and he got beat on that deal. So he was already a work in progress, but then had to take a step back and play the politic game. I know that's a word of our present situation today, but he did have to play the politic game to get to that point and take a step back. Even though he was a lethal firecracker, just like Al Capone was. And Al Capone was another crazy son of a bitch who, would fly off the handle. And I think when you were brought up at that time, I mean, sometimes I think I was brought up at the wrong time because the way used to fly off the handle, they would have loved me. I mean, they would have loved me. They would have killed me, but they would have loved me.
That's one way to say it.
No, but I'm being totally honest. You know what I mean? It's like you you don't get to be that guy. Let's talk John Gotti for a second. And anybody who watches John Gotti and the way he came up and what he did and went, tried to do a hit for the boss, and then it got botched because he sent somebody with him and the guy was a flake. He actually killed a made guy. So then he had to pay penance for killing the made guy, and then he came back and he was ready to take on the world. But it was a slow process because he still had to buck up to the guys Lucchini, who was Castellano, and then eventually Castellano was squeezing him like Masseria was squeezing everybody. Gotti got tired of it. Luciano got tired of it, and what did they do? They took the next step respectfully to stake their claim as the number one guy.
You know what's interesting to me about it, and for people, obviously you're not listening to this show unless you are interested in the Italian mafia and the history of it, and not just things that have happened in the past in the days of Lucky Luciano, but how it relates to the time period that Vito grew up, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and what have you. How, all these things are connected. I'm going to throw out another name because Lucky Luciano did that hit, but he did it in order to continue to be aligned and to grow with not only the new, boss of bosses there, Salvatore Maranzano, but also Joe Bananas Bonanno. So it was Maranzano and
Right.
Bonanno who were really the heads of the family who needed to have this thing happen here. You know what I mean? And and Lucky Luciano went to them and they said, okay, if you do this, if you get rid of Masseria, then you'll take over his seat at the table, so to speak. Because again, Masseria was the boss of bosses. He was the one shaking down everybody else who was in the area there. And, Bonanno wasn't going to continue to put up with that. And some of these other guys, they didn't want to continue to put up with that. So it's interesting, again, from a historical perspective, Lucky Luciano was up there with these guys, and he was willing to take out the biggest boss in the area in order to then take the power and redistribute it. So, hey, you're over in that borough and you're over in that area, and I'm over here, and we all get to run our own territories our way, and we'll all kick up to put into the general pot that benefits everybody, as opposed to we got to pay in order to support just one guy. And I guess that was the biggest difference with that situation and that hit and what it opened up. That's how the whole five families, the commission, whatever, that's how that all came about. But I wonder, because way after that, throughout history, we end up going backwards, just like you said. The reason why John Gotti had to do what he had to do is because he was getting sick of this guy acting like a tyrant. Everybody had to kick up to him. No, it shouldn't be that way. We got to redistribute this thing. So it's almost like history just continues to repeat itself. Why do you think that is, Vito? We're talking about things that are like 100 years apart from each other.
It's just the way mob life is. some things don't change. And when they don't change, I mean, it's part of the culture. It's just like when you're a May guy and they have, they have the ceremony to make you, and they take some of your blood, they burn a card, they have a candle, they make you take an oath, and these things are legit, these things are real, and they believe in them. This is sacred. And just the way that, the Italian mafia lifestyle is, it's a sacred thing. It's not as sacred as it was back then, and it's not as publicated as it was back then, but it still lives in our society today. Believe me, guys, it still lives in our society. And there are guys out there, there are wise guys out there are made guys out there who have territories, who do certain things and run certain things. And I'm trying just to be very subtle in the way I'm speaking, so you guys just follow along. And the enterprises of the mafia still live today.
They sure do. They modernized, and they're still making billions of dollars. You know, it just it's the way it is. I wonder about another thing too related to that. Since you bring it up about the fact that they're still running to this very day, when it comes to the name of some of these organizations and what have you, the five families were the Bonanno family, the Colombo family, Gambino family, Genovese, and the Lucchese family. Some of those families still exist today, even though they're not run by anybody
Yes.
who's in that bloodline per se. Why maintain the names? Like what, like Bonanno family, for example. I'm just throwing them out there because I know that they still exist. Why continue to call yourselves the Bonanno family when a Bonanno hasn't run that family in generation?
It's culture. It's just culture. It's just the culture of the beast, and it's just the culture of the way that the way it is. It's not anything that is that's different. It's just the acceptance of what goes on in life. It's like some things don't
Hmm.
change.
Yeah.
Those things don't change.
You go to a Catholic mass and it's still the same mass.
Yeah.
Right.
No, no, no. I mean, dude, you just brought up a good point, right? It's how do you celebrate? Let's see. I'll pick Puerto Rican heritage, and how do you celebrate Five
Yep.
Kings Day, right? And then there's, you take the Irish culture, and there are certain holidays they celebrate a certain way. Uh, Germans have a certain culture, and they celebrate certain holidays. And the Italians, like the San Gennaro feast, that's been around for decades. That will never change. Go to Little Italy, right? That will never change. Go to the 18th Avenue feast in Brooklyn. That will never change. Go to the 13th Avenue feast. That will never change. And these are things that have been going on since I'm a kid. It's just the culture. And when you follow this culture, there are things that will not change or bend. And this is just life. And it'll be around for the next 100 years.
Well said. Well said. It's true. It's true. I'm going to bring up something that happened, and this will live historically. So people years from now, that when they listen to this episode, they'll understand where we were as we record this. We're in the first week of the new year, 2025. On New Year's Day, unfortunately, and it was only a couple hours after the ball dropped, there was a situation where in front of a Trump hotel property in Las Vegas, A guy was in a Tesla truck filled with explosives, and the truck blew up outside of the hotel. And it was crazy. Just the most amazing thing. Obviously, the guy who was driving it, he succumbed to the injuries incurred from the truck blowing up, and other people around they got injured, but they are still with us, thank goodness, and what have you. But it got me to thinking about something, Vito, because again, you're a guy from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s. You're a guy who you grew up at a time where firebombing somebody's car or bombing somebody, literally attaching an explosive to somebody's car. So when they started, the damn thing blows up. This was a thing that was happening in the mob, especially during the wars of the 80s and the 90s. I can remember as a young kid in East Boston knowing about guys, not just guys ended up in the trunk of a car, but knowing about cars blowing up and being like, whoa, what the hell are we talking about? A car blew up? And that was intentional. Somebody did that. They rigged that car for that to happen. As somebody who lived basically in ground zero, you're in New York City, you grew up around people and you got family members in the life and what have you. You're a guy who's adjacent, you know what I mean? You handle yourself, you do what you got to do, whatever. How scary was it to know that at any point somebody could just put an explosive on your car, and when you turn that ignition, that might be the last thing that you ever do in your life. Did that ever cross your mind at all as you were growing up back then?
From my own experience and for the way I did things back then, and this is like, you know, I never got to that point where an explosive would be put in my truck. At a point in my life, there were people who wanted to take me out, and there were people who wanted to put some harm on me. But the bomb thing, I think, is a little bit advanced for who I was on the street. A baseball bat, I expected. A gun to my head, I experienced it. A knife in a nightclub pulled out with nine other guys standing outside, and they say, "Hey, what the fuck you gonna do?" And you just say nothing. You know, a maid guy coming into a club that he's shaking down, and him breaking up the place, and they say, "Hey, what the fuck you doing?" He pulls out a gun. You say, "Well, what the fuck you gonna do about it?" And you just look over at the owner, and he looks at you, and I'm left there standing there. And say, "I'm gonna eat this bullet, or I'm gonna walk. He's gonna let me walk out of here," and I walked out. So, I mean, there are different variations of what you expect in your time during this, during if you are involved in any kind of extra activities. But the only way you get to experience or have that fear of a bomb in your car is when you're pretty high up in the food chain. And you got to be that man, you got to be the guy. So that's the best way to explain it, Duke.
I mean, it's just that. Thank God that that's not a common thing anymore. But just the idea of something like that being possible, and you don't even have to be the target. You just have to be around the person who is in a situation where people want them that bad. Oof, I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine it.
Now, I mean, let's take a very good scenario of a top guy, a main guy having to do a bombing. Let's go to Al Pacino in Scarface, and he came in and he was a little guy under another guy, and he had to whack somebody, and he made good. The only thing he had were his honor and his balls. Made his way through, made side deals, was always loyal to his boss, but then wanted more. And he always told him, he says, "Listen, always fly small. Don't be the loudest guy in the room," which is the truth throughout all of wise guy history. Because if you're the loudest guy in the room, You're the first one to get hit. Always be low key, always be under the radar, always just do your business and move on. So when Al Pacino in Scarface got to be one of the top guys, and they said, Tony, we need your help. If you help us, we'll take away your problem, because he was up on some charges where he was going to do time in prison. And they said, listen, you have to bomb this guy who's going to give a speech. Tony went with this guy again, with another guy who they sent to do the job, and Tony was there to navigate it. But then Tony had a conscience and said, hey, I'm not taking out two little kids. So he wound up taking out the guy. The guy gave his speech, and Tony wound up getting whacked. Now, Tony didn't go down quietly. He went down in a barrage, and he was, fighting an army, but he went out with his balls in his hand. He said, okay, you're going to take me out? I'm Tony Montana. And, guys, Lucky Luciano, same way. Al Capone, the same way. And to some extent, you know, Vito LoGrasso in some ways like that, but I never was in that contention to be the guy, so when you talk about life experiences and how you look at things and what the culture is, yeah, always looking over your shoulder is something. Actually facing it is something else.
One of the things that I keep getting feedback on is just the fact that you're providing life lessons when we have these conversations. And these are lessons that can be applied by anybody listening, no matter what they're dealing with in life, who they're encountering. There's a lot of good lessons in here that could hopefully save somebody's life in the long run. You know what I mean? So I got a scenario for you, and we'll call this Don Vito's lesson of the week. Let's say I'm at a club, and I got a date. I'm at a club, having a good time, having some drinks, doing some dancing, the whole nine yards, right? And somehow, some way, and it happens every single day in every single club on the planet, you bump into somebody, they bump into you, or maybe they're checking out your lady, maybe they've had too much to drink, maybe they're in a bad mood and they're looking for somebody to pick on. But ultimately, you encounter somebody who wants to start some trouble with you. Now, you're just there with your date, and maybe this guy is there with other people. How do you handle a situation like that to ultimately be able to get you and your date home safely in the end? No matter what you do, the whole goal is I got to be able to walk out of this place and get her home safely, get myself home safely, what have you. What is the best way to handle a situation like that where a guy's like, "Well, who the hell are you? What do you think? What are you going to do? Whatever," starts mouthing off to you in 2025 in a scenario like that? Don Vito, what's your best advice?
Excuse yourself. Give the guy the right away. Say, I apologize. I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're not cowing down, because in today's society, everybody's got the right to carry. Everybody's got the right to have a weapon. It's not the old days where you're going to throw hands. And I've been in a lot of situations where, like, I've had to, you know, bite my tongue, pull myself away, and just excuse myself from a situation. Now, if it's in your place and you're with a lady, you excuse yourself, you get your lady home, you go back and you say, okay, motherfucker, now what? Now, if you're going to have your boys with you, that's one thing. But if you go in there by yourself, you get much more street cred than you ever think. And Vito LoGrasso didn't need the backup. I went back by myself. And I would go, okay, motherfucker, let's take this, let's do something now. because now I don't have a responsibility on my shoulders and I don't have to worry about anybody else. I just got to worry about Vito. And, in that situation, when people are watching, they watch you leave and they say, that's something's not fucking right. Vito would never do that, but they see I'm with somebody. But when they see Vito come back and they say, okay, motherfucker, let's go, you and your fucking boys, and they back down from you by yourself, you made a statement and a half.
So just to recap here, folks, if it's possible to de-escalate, then do that. Walk away
Yes.
if it's possible. If it's one of those situations where it's not necessarily, entirely possible and this guy's crossed the line too much, what have you, then the first step is to get your lady into safety. And then if you have to go back to straighten things out, then that's what you do. It's funny you say that because as you're talking, I'm reminded of, and I know we keep referencing all the movies and the TV shows and what have you, but it kind of reminds me of that scene in Goodfellas where the character that Joe Pesci was playing, the guy Billy Batts, he just got home. He's having a celebration. He just got home from being in jail for a long time, and he's breaking Joe Pesci's character's balls. And Pesci is there at the bar, trying to have a good time himself, and he's on a date. He's got a gumad with him. You know what I mean? And this guy is busting his balls. So he says, okay, and he immediately tells the girl, we gotta go. But Pesci said to the other guys, Ray Liotta's character and De Niro's character, keep him here. Whatever you do, keep him here. Talking about Billy Batts, who was mouthing off. So Pesci drops the gumad off at her
Right.
house, and then just like you said, he comes back and he straightens that whole situation out. So it's funny that safety first. Make sure that whoever's in your company is safe, and maybe you should go get safe and leave it alone. But if you're gonna have to do something, still make sure the other parties are safe first, and then you can go back and handle whatever you got to handle. Wow, that's
I'll give you a scenario. You know, when I was dating my wife, back when we first started dating, I was in a situation where there was a guy busting my balls. Went outside. He had a couple friends come outside, and it was Vito 150, and I headbutted the guy in the face. I was going to fight the three guys right there. And everybody just looked at me like, "What the fuck?" So my wife seen me like get extra angry, mad, and then there was a time when my wife was working at a job, and this guy kept asking my wife out, and they told him, he said, "Hey, listen, you don't want to fucking mess with her. I think you should leave her alone. Her fiance is gonna come back, and he's gonna fucking get you." "Oh yeah, he's not here right now. It's all right." And he kept asking her out. My wife told me. I showed up at her fucking job. And I told this motherfucker, I said, "I'm going to take you downstairs and I'm going to stick your fucking face under a fucking tailpipe and I'm going to start the car and crack your fucking head open." People fucking legitimately got fucking petrified scared that this kid shit a brick, and I fired him from his job and I don't work there. True story.
I fired him from his job and I don't work there. That should go on a T-shirt.
Yeah, it's the truth. I fired him from his job and I don't work there. Get the fuck out. But let me tell you something. For the 15 people that were listening on the intercom and they thought it was going to happen, people were fucking nervous.
Incredible, incredible.
No, it was legit. It was legit.
This is why you got to keep coming back to the Friend of Ours podcast, folks. Where else are you going to hear real life situations and stories and what have you like this? Just incredible. And again, stuff that applies to everybody's everyday life. There's lessons to be learned here for sure. Vito, what's the best way everyone listening can keep up with you?
All right, we're talking about the Big Vito brand. We're on X. We are on YouTube. We are on Instagram. We are on LinkedIn, the Big Vito brand. You can go to bigvito.com, check out the website. If you'd like to book me, check out the Big Vito brand on X. Hit me up with a direct message. Go on Facebook, the Big Vito brand. Hit me up with a direct message. Or if you can't get a hold of me, get in touch with Duke of Rasslin, and will direct me to you. And of course, Duke will get 10% cut, because that's how the wise guys, the good fellas, take care of the guys who are working for them.
Duke Loves Rasslin on Facebook, on Twitter, Duke Loves Rasslin at gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the show. Send in your questions. Most importantly, folks, we appreciate all of you for continuing to share the show. It is amazing to see how many unique listeners that we continue to attract every single week. That means we're doing something right. And of course, all of you keep coming back for more. Let's really build this thing out, man. We want to be bigger and better every single episode. And the only way we're going to get there is if you continue to share the show, talk about the show, and give us that energy. And we're going to continue to give you some of these really serious, informative, at times entertaining stories and life lessons, because that's what it's all about. Before we get your last word of the day there, Vito, we have a very special person who is celebrating her 8th birthday today. Her name is Sky. And unfortunately, her dad is a little under the weather, so he's not going to be able to make the birthday party today. So she's a little down about that. So, we figure, listen, the Don of wrestling himself, man who is an actor, an entrepreneur, a husband, a family man, a man who is beloved by animals and children all over the world, Big Vito LoGrasso, what do you have to say to Sky on her 8th birthday?
I would like to take this time to wish my new friend Sky a very happy and beautiful birthday. I know that sometimes you get a little disappointed with things that happen, and I'm sure your dad would love to be there. But Big Vito LoGrasso, the Don of Wrestling, is here to wish you a very happy birthday. I hope you have the greatest of days. I hope you have the biggest piece of cake. And I know you are going to have the greatest 8th birthday of your life.
I love it. I love it. That's what it's all about there. Once again, happy birthday, Sky. Best to you and the family. Continue to be the wonderful young lady that you are. Your family loves you. You just made a new great friend in life with the Don Big Vito LoGrasso. I think you're doing all right, kid. That's right. And that does it for the Friend of Ours podcast, the Don Big Vito LoGrasso. Why don't you take us home, brother?
Just remember, Duke, send a box of cannolis. I'm waiting.
A friend of ours, he'll stand up tall. Through gunfire smoke, he'll never fall. With heart of gold and steel resolve, a mystery we'll never solve.